Today, I'm going to teach you the basics of making one of the most simple ice boxes that you'll find around. Let's get down to it right quick. What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for stopping by the channel today. If this is your first time here, thank you so much for coming by. And if you are a repeat member of Sailboat Supplies, thank you so much for your continued support. If you guys are here, you've almost undoubtedly seen the Your Icing Wrong series, the search for the best soul sauce, where I basically analyze different soul sauces in comparison up against the Lawn Care 40, which has long been considered the golden standard of soul sauces. Today's episode is a little bit different though. I've had a ton of people asking me in the comments, how did I build my first ice box? Today, I am going to walk you through the process of making one of the most basic ice boxes that you can make, so then that way you can ice your kicks at home on the cheap. So I think that right off of the bat, one of the most important things to recognize is that your ice box does not have to be super elaborate. You can get away with making an ice box for $60 if you're looking in the right places for the proper supplies. Speaking of supplies, the first and arguably most important thing that you'll need, some sort of cardboard box. The box that you choose should be at least sufficient enough to ice the number of pairs of kicks that you want to ice all at once. If you only wanted to ice one pair of kicks, you could choose a very small box. I probably wouldn't recommend it, however, you theoretically could. My choice of cardboard box preference is 18 by 18 by 24 inches. You'll also need a roll of some sort of tape. I like to use packaging tape, but if you have something else laying around, you could easily use that. For this project, you're gonna need a knife of some sort. I'm using an X-Acto knife. You could theoretically use anything that's sharp enough to cut. You'll also need some Mylar sheets. The purpose of the icing is not to get the shoes as hot as is possible, but more so to expose them to as much UV light as is possible. The Mylar sheets are going to provide a wonderful reflective surface. Last but not least, you're going to need a UV light. One of the main things that you need to do when you're looking for a UV light is to make sure that you have the appropriate wattage. This light is a 1500 watt light. Even though it's super basic, it does the trick insanely well. Now that I've got all my materials assembled, it's time to get into the building process. So let's talk a little bit about that. It may seem a little bit counterintuitive, but when it comes to building an ice box, the first step is actually destruction. What I need to do is to break down this cardboard box until it is a flattened out 2D structure. Now that my box is flattened out, what I'm going to do is actually search for the seam that helps to kind of separate this even further. So let's go ahead and do that. Now that this box is completely flattened out, it's time to create a reflective layer on what's going to be the interior. I'm going to utilize my Mylar sheets, taping them down into place before I create a 3D structure with this box.
The first part of this process for me is actually cutting off the top flaps of the box, so that way I reduce the depth slightly. Then I lay the Mylar sheets along the inside of the box with a little bit of slack to make it easier to close up the box at the end. I tape my Mylar sheets in place, leaving my flaps exposed, so that way when I assemble my box, it can go back to its original shape.
So at this point in time, as you can tell, I have the inside of my ice box almost all the way lined with Mylar sheet. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and close up the ice box now. Let's get down to it.
To close up the ice box, I fold it back into a box shape, and then along the seam that I tore to begin the project, I tape it back up so it maintains a 3D structure. Notice how I fold in the larger flaps on the bottom of the box, because that way it allows for a more continuous surface and a flatter surface at the bottom of the box, which is really important when it comes to balance your kicks during the icing process.
Now that I have this box pretty much put together, let me show you what it looks like on the inside, and I'll show you a couple of areas that I'm gonna patch up real quick, so then that way there's not any gaps with the Mylar sheeting.
So as you can tell, after coating the inside of the box with the Mylar sheeting, we got some pretty good overall coverage. Over in this corner, we're missing a little bit of a coating, so I'll probably fill in those gaps. And then down in the bottom edge here, we're also missing just a little bit, but continue to flip that box around. And with the exception of a couple other small little pieces like this corner, this box is looking pretty much fully coated. Not too shabby for like a half hour's worth of work right there. Let's finish up by coating up those last few places. To fill in the gaps, I basically just cut out small sections of Mylar and then tape them directly over the gaps that did not have any sort of coverage in the box.
At this point in time, I've created the essence of a very basic ice box. A couple of other things that you might want to consider are cutting out some ventilation holes if you are in a poorly ventilated area that's very warm, or potentially creating windows within the box to allow air conditioning or a fan unit to help to cool down the ambient air temperature. Again, the purpose of the Mylar sheets is not to retain heat, but to reflect the light. Make sure that you're always icing in a cool, well-ventilated area that is low in humidity in order to obtain the best results. It's time to show you guys what it looks like in a closet when I have my UV light hanging over it. Alright guys, so I found a closet that I'm going to be able to keep this ice box in. Air-conditioned room, great ventilation through this closet, believe it or not, because we got some vents that are actually running through the closet so it stays cool. So let's go ahead, we'll throw it in there. So what I like to do when I'm setting up my light is make sure that it's hanging just above the ice box. If you leave your light in the ice box, it's going to create extra heat because the fans are going to be blowing the hot air into the ice box. We want to suspend it slightly above, so then that way it does not push any extra hot air into there.
For this project, I used a tie to hang up the light, but typically I like to use a belt because it's easily adjustable.
Now that I got this thing hanging at a good level, it's time to turn it on. Again, the most important thing is maintaining a good height above the ice box. You can see those Mylar sheets doing their job to reflect the light, so it's going to get to every surface. But this is what it looks like, guys. Pretty easy setup. It's very, very basic. Just make sure it's in a well-ventilated, cool spot. Now obviously this is not the most complicated or in-depth method of creating an ice box, but this is one that I've utilized with a lot of success in the past. Keep in mind the temperature that you'll be working around and the amount of ventilation that you will have when creating your ice box. Make sure that you're always icing in a cool, temperature-controlled environment, and if you need to allow for excess ventilation, make sure that you keep that in mind. There are hundreds upon hundreds of different ways to create an ice box, and this is only one of them. But I hope that this gave you a little bit of a better idea of how you can create a simple ice box at home in a very cost-effective fashion. If you guys enjoyed what you saw on the channel today, I'd appreciate it if you gave it an extra 10 seconds to click that like button as well as the subscribe button. Doing so goes a long way in helping to support the channel, which helps me to produce more content like this for you guys. If you guys have any ideas for future videos or any questions, make sure to let me know in the comments below. I will make sure that I get back to each and every one of you. If you're curious to see any of the other projects that we got going on at any given point in time, make sure to check out the website at www.sailboatsupplies.xyz. And if you're interested in the day-to-day ongoings of Sailboat Supplies, check out social media at Sailboat Supplies. As always, I appreciate all of you guys that came through to watch this video. and I appreciate all of you that stuck around until the cold, bitter end. You guys already know, I'm Sailboat, and I'm out of here.